Welcome to Indian time again. It's been a while since we've been here. After the holidays and the busy time, this time is a busy time for many different activities. But welcome back to Indian time. Hope that we get started and get back on track and be doing regular shows again. This month of the January, as we call, it's got a couple of names actually. It's SKC-TV, which is the shooting month, and that is the more recent name that we call it. The people used to call it shaking hand month during welcoming the new year. Many years ago, people would get ready at different homes, prepare meals, and then wait for the new year to get here. When the new year would get here, everybody would sing the handshaking song and go around, and after all that was done, and we'd sit down to a meal and have a meal and then go to bed. And then the next day, on New Year's Day, all day long, people would be going to different homes and visiting people. And every home you went to, somebody had something to give you to eat. So you would eat and visit and shake hands and go on. And that happened throughout most of the day on New Year's Day. Then in the evening is when the jump dances would start, and then jump dancing is a social kind of dance, but yet it's a very serious time. It's for prayers and for giving thanks, but it's also a time to have a good time, and people would come from all over. Back then the homes were small, so there were several jump dances going on throughout the valleys, throughout the reservation here. Songs would be sung by families. These were family songs that are passed down from generation to generation to generation. And these songs are received, are given to the singers, to the families by either by animals or by the Creator would give these songs to them. And those songs are then kept and passed down from generation to generation within the families. So when you went to a jump dance back then, each family or somebody would sing a song. You recognize a song, you know what family and what family that song belonged to. And back then there was so many singers and people that had songs that they would jump dance all night long until daybreak, and each time a person would sing all the songs, and they would go to the next singer and the next singer and the next singer. And there were so many singers that would go on until early morning, and then they would break in the morning because that was the time for the rest, and people would then go home and rest, and then come back that same evening and jump dance again. Sometimes they would go to another person's house and jump dance again. And the same thing would happen. Each family or person that had songs would get up there and sing until they sang their songs, and it go on. Sometimes it would go on back then it went on for a lot of times for 4 nights because they had so many singers. Today we have lost a lot of those songs. There's not too many people that carry the songs or remember the songs. So we only go till sometimes 4, maybe 6 o'clock in the morning when we're done, which is good. It's come back a lot since we first started. But those are the things that are happening this time of the year of the month of the handshaking or the shooting month. Also, after the jump dances, then people would then go into their individual medicine dances, which is a very important part of our culture as Salish people. Medicine dances are for the medicine men who held these dances were back then were very, very, very powerful people who were serious about what they did and who had a lot of power given to them by the Creator and by different ways of that the Creator provided. And it was a time for healing, it was a time for doing many different things during this time period. And it was very, it's a sacred, religious time that we've lost a lot of that. We've lost a lot. There are a few people that continue to do medicine dances today, but back earlier times there were many, many people, powerful people, that held these dances. So that's some of the activities that we do today. And also at this time of the month, my grandmother used to tell my brothers and I when we were younger that this was a time when the medicine dances were going on, that it was very dangerous to be out there at night. And so we weren't allowed to go outside at night or to do things, to run around during the nighttime. When nighttime came, we had to go in a house and we had to stay there until all the jump dances were over, or all the medicine dances were over. And that's something that we don't take seriously anymore. Some of those values that were given to us by our ancestors, we don't practice anymore. My grandmother used to say that was a time that, because there were so many powerful medicine men and women out there, that this is the time the power was out and wandering around. So that was the reason why we were not allowed to go out. And we need to remember that today. We need to remember, I remind our children today that if there's no reason for them to be out there, they shouldn't be out there. We need to remember and bring some of those back here. So that's the activities that is mostly happening now. The place names that we have today, two of them. The first one is Sko'e, which is corner, which we call Elmo Bay. Sko'e is because of the bay, the Elmo Bay, the corner. That's why we call it Sko'e. The other one is Ilqot, which means an area or draw between two mountains, and that's what we call the big draw right now, just west of Elmo. Ilqot, which is big draw, referring to the area that is between these two mountains. Those are the two place names that we have for this show. In the month of December, there's a couple events that took place, and in 1910, the Flathead or Jocko Agency moved from Arlee to the Dixon area. That was in 1910 on January 9th. On the 10th of January 1910 also, some Khek or Claw of the Grizzly Bear, Chief Charlo, passed away. On January the 14th, 1912, President Taft reserved lands on the Flathead Reservation to pay for administrative costs. In 1884, January 15th, Chief Charlo and 4 delegates traveled to Washington, D.C. to express grievances that were happening here. Many delegations throughout the years traveled to D.C. to try to stop a lot of the things that the federal government was trying to force upon the tribes at that time. And in 1898, the post office was established at foot of the lake, or Polson, January 22nd, 1898. In 1994, January 29th, Martin Charlo, last chief formally recognized by the United States government, passed away. those are some of the things that took place in the history in this month of January. If you remember, a couple shows back, we talked a little bit with Joanne Bigcrane about plants and different things that the tribes, the importance of plants to the tribes, to Indian people. And today I've asked Joanne Bigcrane, who works with the preservation. She's an ethnobotanist for the preservation for the tribes, and she has been with the preservation for the past 3 years, and she has worked past 7 years for the tribes. We want to follow up a little bit about the importance of plants, I guess, to the people, to the tribes, and what role they have, the important role that they have with us. The first show, we talked a little bit about poaching, the people poaching the plants, medicinal and food from our area, the tribal areas. And I guess, Joanne, at this time, I would like you to welcome Joanne. And Joanne, I want to talk a little bit about the loss of the harvesting areas. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think in the last show we touched on some of the historical changes that occurred for the tribal people with the treaties and the tribes being moved to the Flathead Reservation. And what it did was to take the broad area that the tribes were accustomed to moving around and finding their berries and their medicinal plants and their roots. It reduced the wide area that they could find all of these plants to sustain their lives. And when they were put onto the reservation, it reduced how far they could travel, where they could travel to. And at some points there were incidents that happened. I think many people know about the massacre at Sealy, and there were other incidents that aren't as well known that happened to a lot of individual people with the tribes who were tribal people, and that were sometimes fatal and sometimes very frightening and near fatal. And for a period of time, everyone was afraid to go back to those areas that they were accustomed to. And so when they came to the reservation, at the beginning, the total reservation area was meant for the tribal people, and the numbers of people were able to find probably an adequate amount of roots and berries and hunting and fishing, those types of subsistence activities. But when they opened the reservation around 1910 to homesteading, it brought in a flood of people from outside, and with the flood of people, it brought a change in how the landscape was used. There was agriculture, there was grazing of stock animals, homes were being developed through a lot of many ways and means. A lot of the tribal allotments were lost, mostly because a lot of the old people from a long time ago primarily spoke Salish, and sometimes it was easy for them to be cheated out of their allotments for whatever reasons. There had been cases of taxes being imposed on them or fees that they didn't know about, and the person would go to the agent, and the agent would take whatever resources these people had, and sometimes it was the land, and they would lose that land. And some of those pieces of land had significant harvesting areas on them. And one of our most notable areas that at the Bitterroot Feast every year that everyone talks about is Camas Prairie. And the area was very rich with bitterroot and camas. And into the foothills in the mountains around Camas Prairie, there were sarvice berries everywhere, and huckleberries, chokecherries, wild onions. There were just many plants. And when all of that area got divided up, the Indians many times had some access, and for some places they didn't have any access at all. It depended on the landowner. And that very much reduced their ability to go out and look for their medicinal plants that they needed.
Okay. Okay, with that, Joanne, we'll take a short break here and then we'll come right back and continue with other questions.
Over the years, our people have lived through smallpox, assimilation, and starvation. We've battled alcohol, drugs, and poverty. Now it's HIV/AIDS. Help stop the spread of HIV/AIDS in Indian communities. Educate yourself and your loved ones before it's too late. This is real life. It has real consequences.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us again today on Indian Time. Remember the two place names that we have today is Qo'e and Nilqut. Qo'e is what we call the Elmo Bay area because of the elbow, the corner there in the bay, and Nilqut is the area between the two mountains in Big Draw. That's what we call Nilqut. Today again we have Joanne Bigcrane from the Preservation Office. Joanne, before we took a break, I don't think we were quite done with the loss of harvesting areas. Do you want to continue and have any more to add to that?
I'll finish with combined with the change in land ownership was also a more environmental change to the landscape. With the development and the homesteading, agricultural crops came in, a lot of the vegetation communities were changed, the grasses changed, other different kinds of crops for animals were grown, like the meadows, and plant species from outside the area that weren't native to this area were brought in to provide fodder and food for these animals. And with not only with the agricultural move, but just with the movement of people as transportation grew from horseback and stagecoach, moved up to railways and roads, it also led the way for noxious weeds to come into our area, into our native plant areas. And at this time we have a significant population of weeds on the reservation, and the tribe has a program that deals with noxious weeds. And so that also provided a reason for a loss of that resource for the Indian people. With some of one of the aspects of noxious weed growth or infestations is that it crowds out many other plants that keep moisture and hold the soil. And when there are a lot more weed populations going, there's erosion, and that means that the rain can wash a lot of soil away, the wind can wash soil away, the traffic from animals and people can also reduce the soil horizon or the soil surface, and it isn't as healthy as it had been in past times.
And over the years, there's been been a lot of destruction, I guess, and development. What kind of plans, if any, or is the tribes working on in restoring some of these areas?
There are a lot of different restoration projects ongoing, and I think probably many as we speak. There are some that are happening along the river and some of the ponds in the Nine Pipe area. There's one project there where they set up a project, they lay a project out to restore the native vegetation to an area that's been heavily infested or heavily destroyed by one thing or another. And up to a point, they had tried to include native plants in bringing plants, native plants, to be restored to the area if they had been identified in that area before. And up to a certain point, the cultural plants were not thought of right away. They weren't a primary issue. And when I came on working with the tribe, we started talking about the restoration possibly of some of the cultural plants into some of these areas. And one area that we have included a lot of discussion from the elders, which has found a great deal of approval and interest, is the Dixon area, because the Dixon area, the Indian name that it was known by was Place of Wild Plums. And when you go down there now, previous, for a few years previous to this, it was very hard to find the wild plum groves, and they were beginning to die and become decadent. And a lot of the elders still, as now at this time, remember going down there as children, and it was a wonderful tribal activity to go down there as a camp and pick plums and probably fish and swim in the river and just living their culture. And so that is one site that now we have brought in that idea of reintroducing, restoring cultural plants to an area that they tried to change into agriculture, and it just didn't take as well. And so now we're going to try to restore it back to its more native, as much as we can possibly identify its more native community.
Just recently, there's been a settlement on the Clark Fork, the restoration that is being done there. The tribes won a lawsuit. And you have any ideas, or you have any information on some of the things that could be done or is going to be done on the Clark Fork?
One aspect of my participation with the Clark Fork cleanup, that I introduced the idea to some of the lead people that are working on the restoration of the Clark Fork area. When we met about 2 months ago, I asked them to consider looking at historical, or even as much as possible pre-contact conditions of the plants in that area. The area all the way from Butte through Anaconda, Deer Lodge, Warm Springs, Bonner, all the way through Missoula was a very important camping area for our people for many, probably thousands of years. And it not only was just important for camping and hunting, but there are many references to berry picking and bitterroot digging. Many people aren't aware that Anaconda, right in that very area, was very, very much used for bitterroot harvesting. And at this point, we've had a little glimmer of light in some of the area that has been heavily contaminated by the waste products from the smelter, is that there is a little stand, a small stand of bitterroot still growing right through the soil in an area where other plants are not existing. And when I was speaking, when I was told about the bitterroot, I expressed my feelings that to me shows the same feelings that were passed on to me by my mother about the strength of the bitterroot and the strength of the Indians, that they have been able to survive so many things through their history. They've lost their land, they've lost their abilities to go out and find the plants for their own subsistence, but we've managed to continue and to adapt and to change to our modern life. And the bitterroot in the Anaconda area is a sign to me that we're going to have, I think, success in restoring, helping to restore as much as we can to the area. And some of the restoration may not be usable for humans to access in terms of food or medicinals, but the fact that we're bringing it back onto that landscape, I think would find approval with our ancestors.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. We're just about out of time, and as you can see, there's so many different things that we can still talk about and discuss as far as plants and restoration is concerned. And it's a very important part to the Salish people in this area, how they have utilized the plants and both medicinal and food. Without those, we would not have survived throughout the years, contrary to what some people believe, that our culture has died and gone on. Our people continue to visit these places, gather medicinal plants. We still use the medicinal plants. We still use the foods that are provided by the Creator and Mother Earth. So it's still a big part of us today, and it's still important. That's why we try so hard to educate people in how to protect these areas. We need to learn from plants and from the environment, and not to destroy, because you destroy those, you destroy a culture and a way of life here. And I guess I would like to just close today. Remember the two words, and again, I thank you for joining us. Please join us again for our next show.